The brand doesn't belong to the marketeer. The brand always belongs to the consumer, and let the consumer decide what they want to call it.
There's no other way but the way forward. So you keep going, and even if you fall back, you have to move ahead.
Everyone has two lives, and your second life begins the day you realize that you have only one.
You were on Shark Tank and you were a winner. How was the whole experience?
Life is a single player game. We just end up believing that it's a multiplayer game. It's all in our mind.
What made Nokia fail? Or is there any hope Nokia coming up? Because Nokia still is a strong brand name.
It's a wonderful conversation that we had. And I think the nature of the questions were not just prodding and thought-provoking, but I feel there's a lot of underlying meaning that is getting uncovered. So thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Hi everyone, I'm Mohsina, founder of Quantum Leaders Program and Self-Discovery Podcast. A space where we uncover the mindset, beliefs, and inner evolution of leaders who are redefining what true leadership looks like from the inside out. Today's guest is someone who truly embodies the spirit of modern Indian entrepreneurship. Aneesh Basu Roy, Shark Tank winner, TEDx speaker, and the founder of TagZ, one of India's most loved better for you Gen Z snack brands. Aneesh began his professional journey nearly 2 decades ago with iconic global brands like Coca-Cola and Nokia, where he developed a deep understanding of sales, marketing, supply chains, brand building, and most importantly, people and culture. Over time, his passion shifted towards building from scratch, leading him into the world of startups. He played a pivotal role in scaling businesses such as Shotan, India's first tech-enabled retail distribution platform, and Healthify Me, where he helped grow B2B partnerships and marketplaces. With TagZ, Aneesh built the brand ground up, scaled it nationally and internationally, raised capital, built strong teams, and successfully steered it to acquisition. Beyond business, he's an adventurer at heart, a Himalayan trekker, golfer, motorbike enthusiast, and strong advocate of active outdoor living. In today's episode of Self-Discovery Podcast, we will explore his journey, his insights on consumer brands in India, startup scaling, and what the future holds for the evolving consumer landscape. Hi Aneesh, welcome to my show, Self-Discovery Podcast. How are you doing today?
Absolutely fine. Thank you so much. My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction.
So, TagZ, I'm pronouncing it as TagZ. What is the real pronunciation of this? And how did you come up with this idea till now? What was your journey behind this?
I think the brand eventually always belongs to the consumer. So it's the consumer who ends up deciding what to call the brand. In the last several years, at least what I've observed is that younger consumers end up calling it TagZ. Relatively older consumers end up calling it tags. There are others who possibly called it hashtags as well. But I always maintain that, the brand doesn't belong to the marketeer. The brand always belongs to the consumer, and let the consumer decide what they want to call it, right? So completely up to them.
Really cool. The thought itself is really, really cool. I think it resonates with all kinds of consumers, I would say.
Yeah. So the origin of the brand name is actually very interesting. And since we're going to be speaking about brands, right, we made sure that we put a lot of thought behind actually coming up with a name which is going to stand the true test of time. So when we started out building the brand, we were very clear that we wanted a 2.5 phonetic name. At max, 3 phonetic name. In fact, globally, if you look at it, most of the iconic and the most endearing brands are typically 2.5 to 3 phonetic sounds at max. In fact, on that note, if you see Lay's is typically about 2.5 phonetics. A brand like Apple, that's again just about 2.5, 3 phonetics. Brands with a longer name, such as Coca-Cola, right, which is typically a lot more phonetic sounds, the consumer ends up shortening it and ends up calling it Coke. We wanted to build a brand for perpetuity, right? And hence it needed to be very easily pronounceable across cultures, because we were not just looking at India as a market, but global aspirations were always deeply embedded into our heart. So that's how, we were very clear, 2.5 to 3 phonetic sounds. We wanted a name which is going to be extremely young. And there was an interesting piece of research that I came across, and I realized that for most millennials, the most familiar or recognizable internet lexicon was basically the thumb sign, Facebook likes, if you remember. For the younger generation, the most recognizable internet lexicon was the hashtag. So the brand name is derived from the word hashtag. There's a Z at the end of it because, of course, it's a very Gen Z brand. So that's why it's tags. And if you look at the font, the logo, etc., everything is extremely irreverent. Very typical of, again, the Gen Z consumer. The brand possibly ends up embodying everything that, the Gen Z consumer typically stands for. And in fact, the word hashtag also symbolizes a lot of expression. So whenever we want to express something, we want to, focus on something, we always use the word hashtag around it. So the brand stands for expression as well. That's how, the brand really originated. While the thought is fairly simple, but there was a lot of deep thought which was given behind even naming the brand.
That's so wonderfully explained, and the kind of research you have thought through before naming it. Thank you so much actually for sharing this, the whole line of thought behind the name. That's really amazing. So you tell me this thing, you worked as an employee for, quite some time and with good names like Coca-Cola and Nokia. How did you think of going ahead and becoming an entrepreneur? Because entrepreneurship and employee mindset are very, very different mindset. So if I may ask you, what prompted you or what pushed you to become an entrepreneur and think that, yes, I can do it, or let me just give it a try. Let me risk it out.
I think fundamentally, allow me to, put it this way, that I've always been a student of philosophy. Somebody like Confucius has always inspired me a lot, right? And there is one of his quotes, oblique maxims, which has been very, very pertinent and very close to my heart. I think he very famously once said, everyone has two lives, and your second life begins the day you realize that you have only one. So I think from early childhood or from my early growing up years, I've always believed in maximizing this one life that I have. And hence, I've always seen myself as an adventurer. I've always seen myself as somebody who's fundamentally a little unafraid, let me put it this way. Unafraid of making mistakes. I started my journey as an entrepreneur. I was 30 back then, and this is almost 13 years ago now. If I go back and think about it, I think it's a bunch of things which came together. So one is, in a way, entrepreneurship was like the end of my first life and beginning of my second life. And this was completely in line with what I've always believed. I wanted to maximize this one life that I have and try and do a lot of innovative stuff, right? While being fairly unafraid about it. I was also coming from a deep understanding by then that I'm a value creator. Personally, I've always believed that I'm a value creator. And I think the best way to possibly create value which doesn't exist at that point in time, in the world, possibly one of the best ways of doing that is being an entrepreneur. Of course, artists, philosophers, sports people, a lot of times they also create a lot of value in their own respective fields, right? But in the line of business, I think, as professionals, one of the best way of creating value is to build something on your own. And that obviously essentially leads you towards entrepreneur. Interestingly, Nokia played a role in me turning an entrepreneur as well. I think my last stint with Nokia was fairly entrepreneurial as well. I was instrumental in setting up the enterprise sales business for Nokia in India, which didn't exist before, I kind of took up that role and opportunity. So that kind of groomed me, prepped me, gave me the required confidence that I could possibly do something on my own. But I think, let me put it this way, it was just meant to be. As somebody who's fundamentally a value creator, it's a step which felt very natural. At that point in time, it didn't even feel like a risk that I was taking, to be very honest.
It felt like the next step.
Yeah. See, I think entrepreneurship, as you rightly said, is a mindset. And I think from a very early stage, I've always been very comfortable. And this is true of, I think, most entrepreneurs. They're very comfortable moving from point A to point Z without necessarily knowing if it is going to be B after C after D after E, right? I think we are very comfortable with moving from A to M and then maybe falling back to B and then straight away jumping to a Y and a Z, right? So
yeah, it's like the way forward. There's no other way but the way forward. So you keep going, and even if you fall back, you have to move ahead. That's the only thought process that entrepreneurs usually work through. You have worked with Nokia, you said, okay, and it must have been a journey where you learned so much. Just on a side note, if you can tell us that why Nokia is not at par, like what made Nokia fail in a way where the competition is, with Samsung, or though it was the pioneer, Samsung, Apple we have. So what made it fail, or what made it not come up to? Or is there any hope Nokia coming up? Because Nokia still, that brand name, like you said, it is a strong brand name.
Honestly speaking, not in a position to comment on this, but then, my personal take on this, okay, and this is purely personal. I feel technology is a market where product trumps everything else, right? I think it's only product and technology superiority which basically can take you to market leadership and keep you there. Yeah. I think where possibly Nokia lost out, eventually. And by the way, a lot of credit to the company. Come to think about it, Nokia was the global number one, was the India number one for more than 15 years. And that's a very long period for a particular company to dominate a particular market, right? Because technology is a space where disruptions happen very, very rapidly. But I think, having said that, I think it's the product where, Nokia lost out on. Nokia was the finest innovator when it came to hardware. But I think strategically, if you look at it, choosing an operating system such as Windows versus, jumping on the Android bandwagon, I think was strategic misstep. Let me put it this way. Secondly, your question, can Nokia regain the lost pride? I think it's a brand which is close to everybody's heart. But as I said, product is the key here. Technology products essentially get developed by investing in R&D. I don't think today, Nokia, which is run by HMD, is capitalized enough to be able to invest, those hundreds of billions of dollars, which is required to be invested in R&D to come up with, the next big innovation, etc. In the heart of my heart, while I still hope that, Nokia regains its past glory, because it was and it still is a beautiful brand. But then at the same time, I feel it is not that easy. It is difficult, largely because, the kind of investment that you really need behind building a great technology product will require significant billions of dollars in the form of investment on R&D. I don't see that happening.
Thank you for sharing this. Coming up to the next question, I would just like to ask you, because you have emphasized on people and culture quite a bit, and you have worked with, multiple cultures and people in that process of business building. What are the lessons that have stayed with you throughout your entrepreneurial journey until now that has really shaped you to who you are today in terms of culture and people?
In terms of culture and people. So let me put it this way, businesses, brands, P&Ls, all of it at the end of the day is an outcome of people coming together. Business is nothing but people coming together, right? It is of paramount importance, right? There is no resource which is more valuable than human resource, let me put it this way. And it's the people who eventually make or break businesses. Products obviously play a role in terms of catapulting you to a certain position. Your brand helps you maintain that position, but the underlying asset which is doing and building and creating all of this is people, right? So people are the most critical thing. Learned it the hard way. What is extremely important for getting the right kind of people and keeping them with you on a journey is fundamentally understanding, what motivates them. And I've always, fallen back on Daniel Pink's theory of motivation. And fundamentally, it's about, those three aspects that end up motivating people. While building businesses, keeping in mind what motivates people to join you and continue to work with you is extremely, extremely important. Culture is very unique and it is very geography specific also. Let me put it this way. I still remember while building Shotang early in my journey, we actually worked on putting together a culture code, right? And I attended workshops in various parts of Europe, came back, ran a lot of internal surveys with the existing org that we had. And back then, if I remember, Showtime was just about some 300, 350 people, right? We built a culture code, we codified it, we kind of spoke about it, we documented it, we propagated it across all our offices, only to learn much later that culture is something which doesn't come out of surveys. It doesn't come or get propagated because of a culture document. Culture is a lot softer. Culture is what you walk every single day. And I think it starts right from the top. So culture of a company, culture of a team, culture of a business, a brand, essentially stems from the top. And it's basically a set of behaviors, right, which you demonstrate on an everyday basis. So you can't have a culture document which is talking of some very lofty values, but at the same time, the founder and the top leadership, whatever they act or behave like on an everyday basis, essentially becomes culture. Yeah. Again, a beautiful large company, for example, Nokia, right, and a global company. I still vaguely remember the cultural values that Nokia wanted to be built on, and it was PAVE. I possibly don't remember what P stood for. I certainly don't remember what A stood for. E also I have forgotten, but I definitely remember what the V stood for, and the V stood for very human. And the reason while having this conversation, I'm still reminded of it is largely because everybody in that company was actually very human. I left Nokia, 2012? We are 14 years. So 14 years hence as well, I still remember that is what the company possibly stood for, because that was part of demonstrated behavior every single day.
That's amazing. So what are the three aspects of your culture in your company in terms of, the values that you have, the three core aspects?
So let me again, possibly break this down. I feel as a young company, as a small company, as a fast growing company, your culture needs to keep evolving as well, and very, very fast. Let me be very honest about it. Possibly in year one, the culture was very different from year 5. And it was largely to do with the fact that you need to create a marriage between the kind of behaviors that you want people to demonstrate and the kind of business outcomes that you need to drive as well. So I think when we started off, one of the key aspects of whatever we were doing, we would always emphasize on, relentless restlessness. And while it sounds fancy, essentially I would keep speaking about relentless restlessness is because in the early stages, it's extremely important that you make sure that the business is picking up speed and velocity and people are acting on action items with a certain amount of alacrity, right? And hence, we would keep speaking about a lot of restlessness, right? But then, by the time I think we got to year 4, we were talking a lot more about basically staying composed in the face of challenges, right? And staying committed to the cause. Because by the time you move to year 4, you're facing many more challenges. You're a larger team, right? And what needs to bind you together is a common commitment towards facing challenges together. So the narrative, I think, keeps changing. It keeps evolving. So for a small business, I think culture is a very dynamic and a very fluid thing. Obviously, for large companies, culture possibly needs to be a lot more stable and spread out and drawn out over a period of years.
And written down as well. That's very true.
Absolutely.
You were on Shark Tank and you were a winner. How was the whole experience, if you can tell us? And who impressed you the most amongst the judges?
Here's the thing. Let me also be very honest. I was a very reluctant participant on Shark Tank. We were in season 1, right? I was, if I remember correctly, I was about 40 around that time. And I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be on TV and being part of the whole song and dance. But anyways, as they say, what needs to be done needs to be done. I think it was a great platform to give the business and the brand the kind of visibility that it needed. And to that end, I think, our objectives were met. It was obviously a great experience. Being able to speak about the story of the brand, on national television. It definitely leapfrogged our growth journey in a lot of unanticipated ways, let me put it this way. So, from that perspective, it was a phenomenal exposure and experience. I think all the sharks, and back then, I think there were just 5 or 6 of them. All of them, are great people in terms of, their understanding of business and their, past experience having built businesses. So can't really say if I was particularly impressed by 1 or 2 people. I think all of them have great strengths. And I think over the last 4 or 5 seasons, their own brand personalities also, if you look at it, have gotten sharpened in specific dimensions, right? So I think Aman obviously stands for the whole brand building piece. I think Namita has a great brand positioning as well. Everybody has a very distinctive positioning.
So it was a great experience for you, like, you being reluctant and not thinking of it, but still you came out happy.
Yeah, not complaining about it at all, as I said. I think it was great for business and great for the brand.
I've seen your profile and, you have not just scaled companies and raised capital, but you have also managed to do a lot of Himalayan summits. You have climbed them and you are into golfing, you are into motorbiking. What keeps this adventurous spirit alive and how does it help you in your leadership mindset?
I think I'm just going to go back to the maxim which I said, it's one life, maximize. I think I've always been somebody who's had multiple passions. And, being outdoors, spending time in nature, not only is a passion, it's a great way of keeping myself grounded and keeping myself active and fit as well. By the way, I've done like 8 Himalayan summits so far. And I thoroughly enjoy the whole experience of, eventually climbing a summit. Some of the longer treks typically have been 10 days, 11 days as well. In fact, I've done a few past treks, valley treks, realized that's something I don't enjoy as much. The whole thrill, the whole experience of being able to summit on the last day is something which I have always felt is extremely fascinating. Yeah. So I think from the perspective of how does it help the whole leadership experience, I've always strongly maintained and believed that leadership, like building businesses, is not a sprint. It's a marathon, right? Yes. Possibly it's not even a marathon. Maybe it's a boxing match. Yeah. It's a battle of attrition. It's about taking a lot of punches and still staying strong and standing in the ring. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think if you need to prepare yourself for that kind of a boxing match, take a lot of punches, you need to make sure that you're in top shape, not just physically, but then mentally and emotionally as well. So for me, whether it's my golf, whether it's my motorbiking, whether it's spending time in the mountains or camping or sleeping in a tent, it's my way of keeping myself prepped for the longer journey. And I think from a life experiences perspective, spending time in the mountains, sleeping in a tent possibly made me realize that it really doesn't matter how many bedrooms you have in your house. The most peaceful sleep is something that you get in a tent under the stars.
That's so profound and so beautiful, actually. I have interviewed Mustafa Salame. He was a refugee. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro multiple times, as well as the Everest. His name is also in the Guinness. I want to ask you here, Aneesh, When you climb, okay, when you're climbing, what is the thought process that is going on in terms of your mindset? Is it like meditation? Is it like, things rushing in? Is it like, when will I reach? What is the thought?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's actually very meditative. And meditation is nothing but the absence of thought. Human beings end up constantly thinking and processing information, and particularly in today's age, right, where we are bombarded with information, right? It's very difficult to keep your mind still. For me, climbing a mountain is actually very, very meditative. I'm a loner. I thoroughly enjoy my own company, particularly if it is, spent while I'm outdoors and in the mountain. So I think, the whole journey of climbing a mountain is very interesting. Fundamentally, as somebody who's done a bunch of Himalayan summits, you realize that, your will is possibly extremely insignificant, because the mountains will teach you that unless the mountain wants you to climb, you cannot climb it. And for me, the translation of that is very few things in life are actually in your control. Contrary to what we believe, you will end up climbing a mountain only if the mountain is willing enough to let you climb, because, weather can come in the way, terrain can come in the way, lots of things which can go wrong. I still remember, for example, one of the treks that we did, and this was going up beyond Gomuk and Tapovan, right, where the Ganges starts. It took us 3 attempts. For 3 different days, we kept on attempting. It's only on the 3rd day, when, the mountains were willing, we were able to climb. So I think, number one, at the start of the journey, you need to keep in mind that not everything is under your control. I think when you're climbing, the most enjoyable part is not climbing necessarily, because that's the arduous part. I think what is the most enjoyable part of the journey or the expedition is every time you look back and see how high you've climbed, that's the exhilarating part. I think life is a lot like that as well, because every single day when we are going through life as its journey, possibly we feel it's not so great. Life is so tough. But then every single time we turn around and we look back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you realize, wow, we've come a mile. Wow. That view is possibly what keeps you climbing. Number 3, I think, as you summit, right, as you are reaching the final stage, that night, you typically wake up early in the morning, possibly in the middle of the night, and you begin your summit climb. That's the most exhilarating part. That's the high that keeps bringing you back, to climbing a mountain.
So when you're coming down, are you feeling that sadness, that overwhelming feeling that, I'm coming down now?
That's the funniest part, okay? Because now you've climbed all the way up, you actually need to come down as well, right? Yeah. And fundamentally, there is no motivation except for the fact that you have to get back to the safety of the nearest village. So sometimes, that journey in itself is something that ends up taking its toll. Not very easy at all, but then you have to do it, right? Because it's something that needs to be done.
More of a duty and a responsibility than motivation.
You have to go through the motions, right? By the way, this is not something a lot of people know. It's actually a lot easier to climb up than to descend. While descending, possibly the strain on, let's say, your lower back, on your quads, etc., is actually a lot higher, and necessarily not a very comfortable experience. It's also something which requires a certain amount of technique. So there are times in life you feel, my journey is done, the highest point is done. But then just going back to base in itself can be the final stage.
More tougher, yeah. So looking back at where you started and where you are today, what internal shift in mindset or priorities or identity, for that matter, okay, that you had to have the transformation in terms of you looking at yourself as a leader or a person who is where you are today?
I follow Naval Ravikant a lot. The reason he resonates with a lot of things is because I think the way he puts across a lot of things simplifies, everyday experiences in life. And he's been an entrepreneur and, a very famous investor. So I think he very famously said that, life is a single player game. We just end up believing that it's a multiplayer game. It's all in our mind, right? At the end of the day, we end up building a lot of chaos, sometimes calling it anxiety. I think all this scenario building, etc., that happens with us on an everyday basis is all in our mind. I think one of the biggest realizations that I've had, building businesses, building teams, building brands and teams, etc., is it's actually a very lonely journey. Number one, you need to realize that you're doing this alone. While there's a team, fundamentally the task of or the role of a leader is actually very lonely. So it's a single player game. It's very important that you guard yourself against overthinking, overanalyzing, situations or other people's behavior. I think one of the biggest shifts that has really happened in my mindset is that I realize it's a single player game, and I'm playing that accordingly. When I started my journey as an entrepreneur, value creation was obviously top of my mind, but then somewhere or the other, legacy creation was also a high priority, right? Wanted to build something which was large, build something which would stand, the test of time. I was possibly looking for that higher purpose or that higher calling. Today, I think the way I see it is, if it is meant to be, it will be. I stay focused on value creation without necessarily obsessing about, the outcomes. I think there's a lot of urgency in my actions, but I'm not chasing urgency in outcomes any longer, because a lot of times that is outside your control. I think those are some of the behavioral shifts in value system as well. The child in me is still very alive. Value creation, brand creation, product creation is something which I still find extremely fascinating. And I'm constantly ideating about, what new could be done, not just in the food and beverage space, but then maybe in the technology space. I think my involvement with the process of creating one fundamental value is a lot more than thinking about, the outcomes of it. And so, for example, I feel 13 years ago or 14 years ago, when I started my journey as an entrepreneur, a lot of my decisions were based on, is this going to create legacy? Is this going to create lasting value? I think the obsession with that has reduced significantly. And I find myself a lot more obsessed with purely creating value, deriving greater joy out of it, and not necessarily worrying about outcomes as much.
What I gauged from, the whole conversation, it's like a whole cycle of life that, first is the hustle, then is you enjoy the things around you, what you have accumulated, and then the ambition goes down and it is only what you are giving to society is what matters to you.
I think we all have our ways of perceiving, various aspects. So I thoroughly enjoyed the way you've possibly, summarized it as well. Life is a lot like poetry or paintings, right? All of us look at a beautiful masterpiece, but then we all have different perceptions about it.
True.
It's a wonderful conversation that we had. And I think, the nature of the questions were not just, prodding and thought-provoking, but I feel there's a lot of underlying meaning that is getting uncovered. So thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and, all the best. I'm sure this will go a long way.